This class is concerned with action learning. Now this is an important topic and one with which you should be familiar. You'll see from the bottom right hand corner of the slide that there are 118 slides in the class. However, not all of the slides contain a lot of information, so it will not take us that long to complete this class. Nonetheless, feel at ease to stop the video, make notes, wind it back, wind it forward, and so on. So let's start. We're going to talk about action learning. Now this is a method of personal, managerial and organizational development. It's learning by doing and may not involve any teachers or printed syllabus or regulations. It may not involve institutions, or it may not involve a literature. It may also not include case studies or even a business game. So we're excluding a lot of teaching aids, a lot of approaches to learning that are traditionally used. So action learning, it's a method of personal, managerial and organizational development. It's learning by doing. It's hands-on. It may not involve teachers. It may be a very personal experience. You're learning from doing something and making observations about what you're doing, and learning by touch, by making. So there may not be a syllabus or regulations. It may not be a college or a university or a school, or there may not be any of those institutions involved. So it's learning by doing. Now let's start. Action learning, it is a way of learning from our actions and what happens to us and around us. It involves us questioning what is happening around us and why it is happening. It involves us understanding and reflecting on what has happened and what we understood. The insight we gain will determine our future conduct. Now, this means that we observe what's around us. We observe the environment. We observe what we're doing. We may be performing some action or completing a task, or it may be some aspect of work in a business. And as well as performing the task, we're questioning what is happening and why is it happening? How does this work? So we're trying to get a deeper understanding of the task, which enables us to learn from the task. And we reflect on what we have experienced. And that reflection gives us an even deeper understanding of what has happened. And once we have reflected, our future conduct, the future way in which we approach tasks or approach this particular experience, will be modified perhaps in light of our experience, our previous experiences. So we are learning by doing. Now what is action learning? Well, action learning is a continuous process of learning and reflection. It has the purpose of improving our way of working and our problem-solving faculty. We perform tasks and we learn from performing the task. We question what we've done. We study and think about the task we've just performed, and then we reflect on it. We think deeper about it and think about the approach we've made, so that in future, when confronted with the same situation, with the same task, we are better equipped to deal with that situation and to work more effectively. The core of action learning is taking the task as the vehicle for learning. The task is the vehicle for learning. At college, the vehicle for learning may be the tutor or the video or the textbook. That might be the vehicle for learning. But with action learning, it's the task. It's doing something. It's performing something. Performing a task. That is the vehicle for learning. It's not a textbook. It's actually doing the task. That's how we learn. Dealing with the task and reflecting on the outcome yields understanding. It's how we get greater understanding. We've performed a task, we've thought about it, we've reflected about the task, and that's how we get a deeper understanding. It's a practical approach to learning. It sees learning and as a deliberate action and positively linked. So it sees learning and deliberate action as positively linked. We're learning from what we're doing, performing the task, making observations about the task, looking at the whole experience, reflecting on it, thinking about it, and that's what gives us the insights. That's what gives us the knowledge. And the task is the learning vehicle. It's obviously not appropriate for fundamental research or learning in such fields as mathematics, but it is appropriate in the case of task-driven activities, as for example in a company when the production section needs to make something, they set up the machines, and they set up the production flow network, and then they observe how it's working. They run it and they see how it's working, and they think about it, they reflect upon it, and they think, if we change this, then we could improve the situation. They've reflected, they've learned from the experience, and now they can come back and make improvements. And again, they will make observations and reflect on the improvements and think about it, and perhaps even make further improvements. So action learning allows individuals to learn from experience. That's most important. And of course, they can share the experience with others. So once the experiences have been gained, they may be passed on to other people who are interested in that particular experience. It's important that colleagues should challenge and support. When reflecting on a particular task, colleagues may challenge the way you're thinking about the task. You're thinking about the issue or the problem. So they may challenge it and say, well, why don't we think about it this way, or why don't we do that? But the colleagues can also support the way you think by improving the way we think, by making contributions. So action learning allows the individual to take that challenge and implement it. We think about the issues, we've had the experience, we've reflected about the issues, we've thought about the issues. Now we may come up with changes and implement the changes. And we may review with those colleagues the action taken and the lessons that we've learned. It's a good idea at the end to sit down with colleagues and talk about the experience, talk about the reflection and what came out of it, what processes of thought we had gone through, and what types of analysis we had undertaken to try and understand the experience. Bring it all out into the open and record it, so that in future, when a similar situation arises, there is a response ready for it. A lot of this is based on the work of Revens, 1998. He's the person who developed the whole ideas of action learning. So action learning allows the individuals to Revens developed action learning and his work may be summarized in a simple equation. So action learning allows individuals to learn from their experiences, and what Ravens did was to portray this as a very simple equation. So we have learning, which is equal to programming plus questioning. In other words, when we are confronted by a problem, let's say in industry, we have standard responses. We have the responses that the company has worked out, that if this happens, then we do the following. And these are programmed responses. These are the standard responses required in this situation. And having implemented the solution to the problem according to the documentation that the company has, the person implementing it may question it. May question, why did we do this and why did we do that, and would it not be better if we did it this way, or would it not be better if we looked at the whole situation differently? So we're questioning. So programming plus questioning equals learning. Now this was later expanded to be learning is equal to programming plus questioning plus reflecting. So we learn by taking our standard responses. If this happens, this is what we do. This is what the manual says. This is what we've always done in the past. So if this happens, this is what we do. But now we also question it. We also think, is there a better way of doing it? Are there other approaches we could use? And having gone through the experience, we reflect upon the experience. We think about the whole thing and think, we solved the problem in this way, but could we have looked at other ways of doing it? And that's how we learn. So action learning allows individuals to learn in this framework. Action learning is a more hands-on and almost more dynamic way of learning. It looks at the problem, it looks at the standard solutions, the programming solutions if you like, the ones that are written down. In the event of failure, this is what we do. But now it adds in questioning. The individual may question the programming. It may question what happened, what caused the problem, what is the experience. And then it reflects. What to avoid in action learning? Well, don't impose your values and opinions on others. Try to get a wide variety of opinions and perspectives on a situation, on an experience. And don't try to influence them, because whatever their value, their opinions are valuable. They're worth recording. They may not be correct, they may be missing the point, but at least at the start, record everything, because within all of those comments there may be a gem of an idea, there may be a very good idea that everyone has missed. So do not impose your values and opinions on others. Don't give strong and forceful advice. In fact, any advice may influence and damage the reflective process of learning. So try to leave it as natural as possible. There has been some sort of experience, perhaps a problem. Let everyone think about it and reflect on it, and then come back with suggestions and ideas and record all of them, because, as I said, within all of that there may be a really good idea that everyone has missed. But if you are very forceful and very strong in your advice, you may intimidate others about giving advice and giving their opinions. That's bad. But also, it may be the case you just simply direct them down the wrong way. Let them freely think about what has happened so that they can come back with more informed opinions. And don't be judgmental. This may damage the process also. Don't judge their opinions, and if they're wrong or completely misplaced, embarrass the others who have made a contribution. Just take their opinions and make a note of them and be polite and thank them. Along the way, those ideas can be lost, rather than embarrassing the people or intimidating them. So don't be judgmental. Don't be condescending or try to upset them for making, if you like, silly comments. The comments were not intended perhaps to be silly. The comments were intended to be constructive. They were just simply wide of the mark. So action learning should run along these lines. Criticizing or disparaging learning may damage confidence in the process. So avoid criticisms or insulting people for making silly comments as you see them. That's not the purpose. The purpose is there has been an experience. Get as many perspectives as possible on the experience and talk over the whole experience, having reflected upon it. Let everyone reflect upon what's happened and then come back as a group and try to understand what happened from the reflections, make points, and see if a new way, a new approach could be devised in the event of that situation arising again in the future. Now, the benefits of action learning, well, there's increased learning, and the skills to learn more independently leads to more self-confidence. So when individuals make a contribution, they've had an experience, they've reflected on it, they've made a contribution which may have changed the approach the next time round. They feel more self-confident, they feel more at ease. They also feel more a part of the activity. They're being valued, and that's important. It's important for them to make future contributions. So the learners become more aware and can connect learning from different experiences. In business, it's often the case that workers and managers have a variety of experiences, and they reflect upon each of them separately. But they may also look at the totality, look at all of the workload, and look at the way it's all organized, so they become more aware of perhaps ways in which the work could be performed or scheduled that's more realistic or more efficient. So learning comes from a broad spectrum of life. Learning is not just what we pick up from books. Learning is from experience, and that's one of the benefits of action learning. It takes our experiences and extracts knowledge from the experiences so that we have a much better understanding of the experience and a much better knowledge base upon which to approach practical problem solving in the future. The learner becomes more political and engineers learning experiences. Well, over a period of time, when an experience happens, the learner is more aware that colleagues may criticize him or her, or colleagues may come up with solutions, and it's important that their solutions are not adopted because it will lead to something else which is adverse to the company. Well, instead of just summarily dismissing their proposals, it's important to be more political, more polite, and gently move the people away from their position towards one which is more realistic and one which is has a better chance of long-term success. And the learner becomes more proactive in problem solving and decision making. Once the learner has gone through a learning experience and has reflected upon it and made a contribution and has seen his or her contribution being valued and perhaps being adopted, then they have more self-confidence, and they become more proactive. They're looking for situations to try and reflect upon the situations, and they become more engaged in their work, more involved in their work, more motivated at the work, and more loyal to the company. They are more involved and more valued, and that's important. So the benefits of action learning. Well, cultivating a reflective approach to learning means that benefits may flow from all sorts of experiences. It's not just a problem that's arisen, perhaps, but it could be something positive, some good experience. And again, having looked at the experience and having gone through the experience, the person reflects on it and extracts the good points and looks at what could be improved even further, and looks at the whole set of connections that help to generate that experience. So there's learning in all of that, and that learning comes to the person through quiet reflection. It leads to more acute experiences, where more is learnt from each experience. Well, having gone through the first experience, say within the business, the learner will go through the second one and have more confidence with the second one, as I said earlier, but also will be more equipped to deal with that experience, will, if it's a good experience, will reflect upon it and see why it was a good experience, and if it was a bad experience, look for solutions and reflect on it and come up with ideas to improve the situation. They'll become more acute, more aware of the experience and this approach to learning and to problem solving. More flexibility in the labour market as skills for learning are more finely tuned. When workers and learners have the confidence to look at experience, reflect upon it, and make suggestions, they can become valuable assets within the business. And this means that workers of this type, or learners of this type, are highly sought after. They are problem solvers. They have looked at the experience, be it positive or negative, as I said earlier, looked at the experience, they've reflected upon it, and they've gained deeper understanding as a consequence. And they have the capacity to do this with many experiences, not just one experience, but with other experiences. And that means they become valuable assets to any business. There can be good and supportive team working and problem solving. With experiential learning, it may be that groups very informally come together to look at the experience and think about it. They may talk it over a coffee. They may think about it later. When they go home, they may reflect back on something that happened at work earlier in the day and think about the way it was approached and the way the problem was approached and how it was solved. Or if it was a good experience, why was it a good experience? Why did it work that way? What would happen if something was changed? So they may involve their colleagues and work in small teams informally. There's no organization here. These are informal meetings of the workers just talking about what happened and this is the way it should be, and that would improve the situation. So they are learning by experience, and they're talking to each other and taking ideas off each other, and this becomes the accumulated knowledge of the business. And this is why action learning is so important. Now, the principles of action learning, well, more involvement with their own learning. The learners are directly involved with their own learning because they're looking for the experiences upon which to reflect and learn. The interest in learning is promoted, and when the reflective skill is developed fully, better learning is achieved. So there is interest in learning because it's hands-on, it's practical, it's a part of their everyday lives. They are working and doing things, doing tasks, encountering problems or gaining positive experiences and reflecting upon these. So the learning is more enjoyable, it's promoted more, it's active. They can see the consequences of their actions immediately. So they are more engaged in the work. The learner is actively involved in his or her own learning. The learner is involved there. The learner is the one who has the experience, positive or negative, a good experience or a bad experience. But it's the learner who has the experience and can therefore reflect on the experience and will learn from that. So the learner is actively involved with the learning situation. Engagement in a voluntary form of learning usually leads to more and better quality learning. Generally speaking, there's a lot of support for this point, that when we are interested in a topic, we learn better. We learn faster and we get a better understanding because we are interested. We're engaged in the learning process. And with action learning, the learner is involved all the way through. It's the learner who has the experience. It's the learner who reflects. And therefore, there's a better quality of learning. There's a deeper learning. So it promotes that type of situation. Now, learning occurs at 3 levels. It's related to issues being considered. It's related to the process of learning, and it's related to the learner. So there are 3 parts. So what's the issue? What are we looking at? The issue is a situation perhaps in business. So what are we looking at? What's the process of learning? How are we going about looking at this issue? This problem perhaps, or this positive experience. How are we going about looking at it? And the way we're going about looking at it is by understanding it and then reflecting upon it. And it looks at the learner. Now, the principles of adult learning. Well, the approach to adult learning should be supportive but challenging. I mean, adults are, they have got strong opinions about things, and be the opinions right or wrong, they have got strong opinions. So looking at adult learning requires supportive comment and challenging, but challenging in a way that leads them to consider different approaches. And once they've considered the alternative approaches, they may then voluntarily select one of the alternatives. So, generally speaking, we deal with adults in a supportive but challenging form. It's important to pay attention to what is said. Not only will it cause frustration if what's said is being ignored, but it will cause alienation. The people saying it may give up and think that their views are not being valued, so why should they make a contribution? So paying attention to what is said is important. And careful reflection following the learning experience. it's important to emphasize the nature of reflection and explain to the learners that having had an experience, it is important to think back and to take time to think back about what happened and what was the situation, what was the problem, what was the issue, how was it looked at, how was it dealt with, was that the best way, could the reflection throw up alternatives which perhaps would have been better. So reflection is important, and it should be pointed out that it's important to take time to think back. And questioning is important. Why do we do it this way? Why don't we do it that way? And there should be ready answers to these. If there are no answers, then the whole process is haphazard. The whole process is random almost. There should be answers. We do it this way because. This is the most efficient way because. So when questions are posed, there should be standard answers. It's only when questions are posed that there are no answers that leads to further questioning and reflection and thinking. It's particularly important if the new questions, I should say, if those lead on to a more improved approach to problem solving. If that's the case, then the new questions are very important indeed. With adult learning, feedback is important. It's important to give and receive feedback. It's important that when a contribution is made, it's evaluated, it's thought about, and feedback, appropriate feedback, is given so that the person's contribution is seen as valuable and it's understood. There is clear communications between the person giving the suggestion and receiving the feedback. Now let's talk about learning. Well, back to Evans, as I said, he's the person who developed action learning. Learning must be equal to or greater than the rate of change. So we must learn faster than the situation is changing. If it doesn't, it's out of control. If the situation in a company is changing very rapidly and the staff are not keeping up with the rate of change, that company is in trouble. The workers, the managers, all the staff of the company, they must have learning which is greater than the rate of change. They should be in front of the rate of change and leading it. So it's essential that that is the case. So learning must be greater than the rate of change. Now what happens during an action learning set? Well, here we've got time, we've got the presenter's role, and we've got the supporter's role. An action learning set is where we're meeting to look at some situation, some experience that we've had. We're looking at it, we're looking at some situation within the business, let's say. And we have a presenter's role and we have a supporter's role. Now in the beginning, the introduction and description of the material. So it's important for the presenter in an action learning set, in an action learning environment where there's a small team perhaps looking at some situation. It's important for the presenter to introduce and describe the material. And it's important for the supporters to observe and listen. So that is the opening part of the learning set. The learning set is, as I said, having had the experience, we're individually have reflected upon it, now we're meeting to discuss what is the learning outcome of that experience. In the middle of the learning set in terms of time, we explore and questioning, learning and thinking. We go through all of the processes of, we have set out the situation, this is what we encountered, we've explored what we encountered, we're questioning it, what questions were posed, were they reasonable questions, were the follow-up questions that were looked at, how were the questions grouped together, did they form themes. We've listened to what people have said and we've thought about it. And the supporters, the other members of the set who have come together for this exercise, they are challenging the presenter to identify the action points. So the other members of the set want, what are the action points? What came out of all of this exercise? What do we do new in the future? We've had this experience, we've thought about it, we've come up with all of these questions, and we've listened to what each of us has had to say, and we've thought about what was said. Now, what action points can we derive from this? Because it's the action points that we're going to use in the future. At the end, the presenter explores possible future actions. What could happen in the future? If the same situation arose, would we go about it in the same way? Would we use the action points that we've developed here and go to that situation using the action points and try to resolve the issue using the action points straight away? Or how would we approach a similar situation in the future? And the other members of the group, the supporters' role, would be questioning and challenging and reflecting and recommending courses of action. So the totality of the action learning set, this little group that have met to look at the situation, they would come up with a set of questions, a set of comments, they would reflect on the whole experience, and they would recommend courses of action, which then the presenter could take over and write up, which would be the outcome of the learning set. So action learning, as I said, is active. It's action learning is action. It's learning by doing. And in this case, if there were a few people who've worked on some issue, they've had the experience of working on the issue, they could then come along in an action learning set, a little group of them, appoint one as a presenter, and that presenter is trying to make sense of the whole experience, and the rest of the group are making comments and challenging and trying to identify action points and coming up with recommended courses of action for future use if a similar set of circumstances arises. Now, the 5 main elements of action learning. First of all, the individual voluntarily joins the group. There should be no force. Voluntarily joining the group means that the group members are more engaged. They're more enthusiastic. They've voluntarily joined. Nobody forced them into it. They want to be there. They want to have their voice heard. They're interested. And therefore they will make a better contribution. Generally speaking, a set is normally 4 or 5 people who meet regularly. They may meet regularly to discuss various experiences, or they may meet just once to discuss one particular experience they've all had. But it's wise to meet on a regular basis to review, say, work within a department in a business. To meet regularly to discuss all of the issues and talk about various experiences they've had and see what improvements can be made. It could be made to the flow of work within the department, or to processes that are brought to bear on solving problems. So it's wise to meet regularly, but as I said, it could be that just meet once to discuss one particular experience that they've all had. But it depends. Generally speaking, it's better to meet on a fairly regular basis, perhaps once every month or once every week or whatever is deemed to be appropriate. The issue or task, each person brings what they want to work on. So if it is a regular meeting, then each person may identify some issue and bring that issue for the others to consider. Now the others in the group will think about all of the issues at the end. So if there are 5 or 6 people, there may be 5 or 6 issues to consider at the end. And this may be done in a very general sense, just talking about the problem or the experiences and just writing them down and on a flip chart. So there's a presenter who just makes a note of these, and the others watch and make a note and think about it. And then they go away and reflect upon all of these and start to think, so that the next meeting is a much richer experience. There are now lots of ideas associated with the 5 or 6 points that were made at the start. And these 5 or 6 points may be totally different aspects of work, but now there are going to be other points coming off each of them. And the process is to challenge thinking, to challenge the way it's currently done. Whatever the activity is, how is it done at the moment, and how could it be improved? Why is it done the way it is, and how could it be better organized? The facilitator, or if you like, the presenter, helps the group as it works and learns. One of the group is nominated as a facilitator, and that person simply perhaps stands in front of the others as they sit around in a semicircle and with a flip chart and just writes ideas down and just thinks generally about what's been said and asks some pertinent questions. So the facilitator, or the presenter if you like, helps the group as it works through the issues and learns from the tasks. And that set of ideas was again developed by Revens this time in 1991. Now, differences in approaches to learning. Well, we have traditional learning and we have action learning. Now I'm going to give you a sort of a table here to look at each of these. So we're going to have, first of all, traditional. We have historic case studies. It's traditional learning. We have a case study that's written up about a company and it's published. It goes into a library and students may read about it. So it's historic. It's what happened in the past. Action learning is dealing with real case studies here and now. It's looking at the situation now. It's action learning. It's doing it at this moment. So there's a time difference between the two. Traditional, historic, action, current. Traditional is individual focused. Generally speaking, the individual tries to learn the outcome of the case or learn from texts or learn from lectures or whatever. So it's individual. It's going into the individual's head. Whereas action learning can be group-based. The group can look at a situation and the group can experience something and try to work out what happened. They can reflect on it. They can gain knowledge from the experience and they can talk about it between them so that they get a much richer picture of what has happened. Traditional learning is learning about others. Generally speaking, it's looking at other situations. It's looking at processes in marketing. So it's looking at a marketing department, what happens within the marketing department. Whereas action learning is learning about the self or others, learning about what's going on in the business right now, looking at your own role in the business and looking at the role of your colleagues in the business right now. So it's much more self-centered. Traditional learning looks at other organizations, whereas action learning looks at to study the own organization. Looks at the organization in which you work, whereas traditional learning looks at other organizations. Traditional learning involves planning how to learn, whereas action learning is planning and doing it. Planning the learning, but also doing it, actually doing it. Traditional learning is input-based. It's getting inputs and making notes from the inputs. Action learning is output and results-based. The action learning is looking at an issue and solving the issue. It's output-based. It's solving the issue, it's gaining the experience of solving the issue, and then reflecting on the experience and learning from that. So it's output-based. Traditional learning is, as I said earlier, it's past-orientated. It's looking at the past, whereas action learning is looking at the present and the future. So traditional learning looks at practices perhaps in the past that were used and looks at research that was conducted in the past into certain practices. Whereas action learning is looking at the present. There's an issue now, right now, that needs to be fixed. And that issue generates an experience for the people working on it. And they develop solutions. And they're looking to apply those solutions in similar circumstances in the future. There's very low risk of anything going wrong in traditional learning. The students go to lectures and to classes and talk to tutors and watch videos and read books, and there's very low risk involved in any of that. It's a question of picking up the knowledge and learning. Whereas with action learning, it's high risk. There is a situation, and in trying to solve the situation, the learners may make it worse before they start to make it better. So there is a risk involved in action learning. It's doing something. It's trying to fix a real situation. But in so doing, they may exacerbate the problem, at least initially make it worse, and perhaps fix it subsequently. Traditional learning is passive. It comes at the student, and the student absorbs it. So information is passed to the student, and the student absorbs the information. Action learning is active. The student has to go looking for the knowledge. They look for the experience, they've had the experience, they reflect on the experience, and they extract the knowledge from the reflection. So it's active. They're learning by doing. Traditional learning is theory-based. It's looking at theories and the applications of theories and testing theories, perhaps using the scientific method. Whereas action learning is practical application. It's looking at a problem and trying to solve the problem in a practical sense, making it work. These were all adapted from Markusson's book, 1988. Okay, the action learning equation. Well, I've already mentioned this earlier, but let's just go across it again slightly. So we have the programming approach plus questioning is equal to learning. You'll remember from earlier in this session. So P is programming knowledge. That's expert knowledge, knowledge in books. What we do because that's the way it has always been done. Programming can be a manual, an instructor's book that comes to show workers how to solve problems should they arise. That's programmed. It's step 1, step 2, step 3. If step 4 doesn't work, go back to step 2 and make the following changes. So it's programmed. So P is the programmed section. Q is questioning. Aspects of previous experience is useful, relevant, or just what we don't know. So we just question what we don't know. We try to find out. So we try to get a greater understanding by asking questions about the process that we're considering. When you put both of those together, we get the learning. It's the result of combining the programmed knowledge and the questioning, which gives us our learning. Now let's see what presenters should do. Presenters we called facilitators earlier as well. So let's have a few words about those. Well, the presenters should prepare for meetings. That's fairly obvious, I think. If they don't prepare, the meetings will not be a big success. But it should also be clear about what they want to achieve from their, if you like, their airspace, from their position. They need to be clear about what they want to achieve, what they will do to ensure this, and what they will ask of the set. So we have a learning set, which is our little group of learners perhaps, and the presenter needs to have a very clear picture of what he or she wants to achieve. They might want to achieve a greater understanding of a particular experience that the set have had. They want to bring about greater understanding of what came out of the reflective period, what sort of knowledge came out of it, and what future courses of action could be based on that knowledge. That is a possibility that the presenters may have in mind, or the facilitators may have in mind. Depends which word you want to use. They should structure the time of the meeting. Be very careful to make sure that the time of the meeting meets everyone's with everyone's approval, and also that the meeting itself is well timed into different sections. So many minutes for this and so many minutes for that, and assign time accordingly. And don't overshoot the time limit, because the people attending may have made commitments following on from the meeting. Tell the set what they want, and point out what isn't helpful. So when the set arrive and the meeting is being conducted, the set will tell the presenters what they want. But it's important to dismiss some of the ideas in a polite manner, without any condescension, without any insults or any aggression or any bad feeling. Gently move people away from points which are not tenable. So tell the set what they want. The printer should tell the set what they want, and also tell the set what isn't helpful, to make sure that the questions and the points raised by the set are relevant. And the presenter should be able to do this in a polite manner. But nonetheless, the presenter is in charge of the situation, so they should be able to tell the set what they want to achieve, and the time scale and so on, and tell them what isn't going to help. And part of that may be to tell them that their own reflective period should have generated useful knowledge. And it's important that the presenter is political in using words which bring the whole set along with him or her. Do not alienate any member of the set. Now, set members, well, they should listen and attend. Listening is very important to make sure that they understand exactly what's required of them. Shouldn't interrupt. You should let others speak and shouldn't interrupt. They should ask for time to speak, perhaps by raising their hand slightly and getting the attention of the facilitator or of the presenter. But it shouldn't interrupt others. They should let others speak and have their say. Even if they strongly disagree with what's been said, they should let it be said and then make the point. They should empathize with the whole procedure. So they should relate to it and they should support what's happening, because they themselves are voluntary members of the set. They're there because they want to be there. So they should be interested in what's happening. They should be supportive. They should support their colleagues when the colleagues are making points. And if they disagree, question it gently and try to get a different perspective accepted. But do it without insult or without causing bad feelings. They should be challenging. They should challenge each other. It's important that they have clear pictures of what's been said and what's been proposed. And the only way to get that picture is to challenge it and ask the what-if questions. What if we did this? Would that be a disaster? Would that lead to a bad situation? Or what if? So they're challenging what has been proposed. Try to ask helpful questions. Questions that promote the discussion and that leads the discussion into a deeper area, so that a greater understanding can be had by everybody attending. So the questions that are asked are helpful in the overall learning of the set. It's important to be clear about what they're about to say or about to ask, and consider whether it's been helpful to the presenter. So make sure that the questions are relevant. Make sure that the points are relevant. Make sure that the points that are being made relate to previous points and advance what's been said. Not just repeating what's been said before, but advance the discussion. And the points that are made should also provide information, if possible. They should give a perspective that enables the other members of the set to gain a deeper understanding of the whole discussion, because they're pointing out some deeper understanding that they have just received, that they have just realized. So share it with the other members of the set so everyone has that better experience. So offer insights and ideas, but make sure it's at the right time and in the right way. So offer the insights and the ideas, but do it being political, allowing the others to have their say and offering their ideas. Then at some point offer your own ideas. Offer ideas that are relevant and insights that you've had, ideas you've had, and put the whole set of ideas and insights in front of the group, so that all of their insights and their ideas are added to yours. So now the group has a much wider set of ideas and insights from which to pick the best solutions. Now we're talking here about experiences and approaches to learning from the experiences, and this is broadly based on the Cobb learning cycle. Now this is the subject of other classes, but it's very important. It's one that's often mentioned in the field of business. So we'll just run through it very quickly here. First of all, stage one, we're having an experience. We have an experience of some sort. The experience is there was a problem and we solved the problem. That was the experience. Or it was something good. We had a good experience. So the point is we've had an experience. So stage 1, having the experience. Stage 2, we review the experience. We think about the experience. We reflect on the experience, if you like. We think back about the experience. We think back about what happened, what was the issue, what were the action points that were implemented, how did we approach the experience, what was the outcome of the experience. So we're reviewing the experience. We had an experience, now we're reviewing it. So we have the experience, we review the experience, and now we conclude from the experience. We learn from the experience. So we have the experience, and then we have the reflection, stage 2, reviewing the experience, reflecting on it. And stage 3, we would say, sometimes we call it, we conceptualize from the reflection. We conceptualize. We try to work out the general principles. We conclude from the experience. We learn from the experience. This is what we've gained. So running across it again, stage 1, we have the experience. Stage 2, we reflect on it. We review the experience. Stage 3, we conclude from the experience. We have learned from the experience. What we sometimes call conceptualization. We have conceptualized the problem, so now we have a deeper understanding of it. And now we can use this for planning the next steps. The next steps being solving the problem, or if we're confronted with the same issues in the future, this is how we go about dealing with it. And that is the basis of the Cobb learning cycle. The facilitator may ask a lot of questions of a learning set in order to bring about better understanding from the learning set experience itself. I'm not going to go through these in any detail, but typical type of questions would be, or issues would say, can we stop for a moment and check how we're doing? So can we just stop everything and think about this? Can we make a note of where we've got to? Or you could ask, the facilitator could ask, how do you feel about what's going on? Again, it puts a person on the spot and they have to say, well, it's useful or it's not useful, and to keep a conversation going or keep a point going, the facilitator may ask us, well, how useful was that comment? Is it something we should make a note of, or should we move on to this other comment? So it's a whole set of questions here. They're all pretty much self-explanatory, and I'm not going to go through them in great detail. These are facilitation type questions, and there's even more if you want to make a note of them. So in facilitating a learning set, these type of questions often come up from the presenter or the facilitator, and they're all designed to enable the people within the set to make points, think back about the experience, make contributions, and to keep the focus on the points in front of them, and to try and get some sort of deeper understanding and deeper outcome from the whole process. Now, closing a session with a learning set. Well, a member of the set takes notes throughout which will be revisited on the next session and kept securely in the meantime. So it's wise to record what's happening in an action set. When a group of people meet, talking about experiences and talking about ways in which they can approach the experience and improve the experience, perhaps in the future. It's important to take notes, to make notes of various points made. Now the facilitator may do this. Sometimes people want to use electronic recording, but the problem with using electronic recording devices is it may influence the behavior of the set. They don't want to hear themselves after it's been recorded. And it also means that the facilitator has to go across all of the set again to try and extract the points. So it might be better just to make notes as the proceedings go along within the action set. So the facilitator may have a separate flip chart and just make big points that need to be addressed at the next meeting. An action plan is drawn up for each presenter, which they will take away and act upon before the next session. So maybe it's the case of action points, and the action points are allocated to members of the set. So each one has a different task to consider, to look into, to research in their own way and to reflect upon before the next meeting, and come back with suggestions that they can share with the whole group. Now this has been quite a long session on action learning. It's very important. It's wise for you to go across the video several times and use the forward and backward buttons and navigate yourself around the video and make notes. And also, if you can, do some extra research into the area, do some extra reading in the area, and pad out your notes. But that's all I'm going to do on this session for the moment, so I'm going to leave it at that and say thank you for watching.